Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me and sharing this moment with me. I have to say, people who are in the field of Holocaust education know that the Holocaust is the darkest topic, driving you into despair, pessimism, anger. That's the black side of it. And the bright side is Holocaust education. When you work with young people, when you talk to them about the past in order to make the future better. So today, there's also a mix here. We're here to remember Babyn Yar. I wrote the book, so Babyn Yar, or Babyn Yar, will be better remembered. But at the same time, I'm here to celebrate. I'm here to celebrate my first book. So I wanted to thank you for both coming to remember Babyn Yar with me, and also for coming to celebrate the book. And I'm here to express gratitude. I'll go with the acknowledgements quickly later. Gratitude to so many people, and express first gratitude and hope. The gratitude for all the people who helped me to come here, and the hope that this is my last academic publication, please. Let's do a Hollywood movie next, okay? Or something else. This project actually took 18 years, and some of the people were instrumental in helping me coming to actually both at the beginning of the project and at the end are here today. I would like to introduce one of them, my colleague and my friend, Professor of Ancient Jewish History at the Ravine Graduate School, Dr. Steve Fine, who is also the head, the Churgin, right? The Churgin head of the Center for Israel Studies.
It's true.
Okay. And he wanted to share a few words.
First of all, this is not Shai's last academic publication, I can guarantee it, because the book's too good. When Shai came to YU and blessed us with his presence and with his energy and with everything that has created from nothing an amazing center. Where's Mr. Fish? Is he here?
Mr. Fish is coming.
Oh, good. So when he's here, I'll tell him. When the Fish Center came to be, it brought a dimension to our university that we always maybe should have had, but with the passing of the survivors has become critical. After all, our students are often descendants of the survivors, and so it lasted a little bit longer in our community than in some other communities. But now that our students themselves are distancing from the Holocaust beyond their choice, because their grandparents are getting older, the Fish Center becomes all the more important to our community and also to the larger world, because the voice of YU is the voice of the Jewish people, and the voice of the Fish Center is the Jewish voice of the Holocaust in North America. And that's so utterly important to me and to all of us at YU in our Center for Israel Studies. But let me just say one thing before I sit down. And that is that Shai's energy in building this center has been remarkable. I remember the day that he came and I said, "Oh, what did you write your dissertation about?" Remember that? And he said, "Oh, Babyn Yar." I said, "Really? I read it?" And then I sent it to Josh Carlip, who's over there, and to some other faculty. And I said, "Is this as good as I think it is?" And they said, "Yeah." And I brought the report back. And Shai said, "Nah." And I said, "Yeah." And this book that I am so utterly excited about and proud to be listed in is the fruits of the fact that Shai and Orly and the kids came to New York and have blessed us with your presence in our communities, and also that Shai has created around his book, around his research, around his personality, the Fish Center. So that's enough praise of Shai for today. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to make it as much about the Fish Center as possible. So I wanted to briefly introduce you to, all my students are dear to me, but one of the dearest is Julian Schmidt. Julian came from Germany to America, and now he lives in North Carolina. And he recently took my class, The Holocaust in the Soviet Union, in which we read a couple of chapters from the book. So Julian.
I didn't think he was going to ask me to speak, so I didn't prepare anything. Thank you first for this honor. There's a famous saying, make for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a friend. Good evening, my name is Julian Schmidt, and as Scheid mentioned, I was born in Germany short 25 years after the Shoah. I grew up in the land of the perpetrators, with the families and neighbors who not only condoned the countless acts of killing, but also attempt to extinguish the divine spark, an unprecedented assault on the body as well as the soul. As students of history, we see the problem of evil not as a theoretical dilemma, but rather that is both personal and communally shared. We see history reflecting back at us personally and as citizens within a society. As a son, I must thank and mention my mother, who in 1961, before there were formal relations between the State of Israel and the Federal Republic of Germany, volunteered on a kibbutz near Haifa. This connection opened a pathway towards learning and reflecting upon history, facing the atrocities and complicity committed in the name of people who look like me. But it was a path I wouldn't walk for another 25 years, although I never chose to look away from history. I left my country of birth to study in the UK and then the US. And after many rewarding years in the corporate world, I found myself returning to the questions I had as a 10-year-old, standing in Yad Vashem as a German with our Israeli friends. It was those questions I wanted to learn how to formulate and ask better. My aim was and is to continue to learn how to ask better questions of myself and others, and to learn how to challenge my own beliefs rather than judging those of others. What I sought and what I needed was a place that taught and teaches about historical facts of the Shoah, but also, and more importantly, imparts the precious contributions that Judaism has gifted the world in the realm of ethics and moral thinking. What I found at the Emil and Jenny Fish Center at Yeshiva University was knowledge and community. What I discovered at the Fish Center are teachers and friends, and often both qualities are within the same person. Today we celebrate Dr. Pilnik's magnificent milestone, the publishing of a book on Babyn Yar. Like many here today, I was fortunate enough to read some passages in the class that he taught. And yes, as a marketer, I have to say I would highly recommend this book to a friend, and for good measure to their friends as well. Dr. Pilnik, congratulations. Shai, congratulations. I fondly remember my very first call with you. I guess it was an interview. I recall the kindness of spirit that you reflected back, easing my apprehension of intruding into a sacred space as a German. You enabled me to be in this space of reflection and reflecting. You and your amazing team have guided me to approach my studies not as an anthropologist, but as a referential visitor, as a friend. I came to the Fish Center to learn, not with the expectation that all that is offered to me, which is much and vast, will be or should be readily accessible and understandable to me, but rather with immense gratitude that I'm able to learn with you, from you, as we grapple with these difficult subjects. You have gifted me with the ability to see more clearly how immense a subject matter it is I'm attempting to grasp. You're not only teaching me Jewish history, you're also teaching me Jewish memory. The Fish Center experience has given me much more than I could have ever hoped for. It has gifted me with teachers and friends, and the gift to ask and love the questions. Both my teachers and friends have affirmed and inspired my decision to devote a piece of my life, perhaps even the entirety of the remaining of my lifetime, to the field of Holocaust education and combating anti-Semitism in our time. You've taught me the importance of reflecting back. To my teachers and friends, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I actually don't see Mr. Fish here. Maybe he's a little bit late, but let's give Mr. Emil Fish a round of applause. After Hashem, I think that the acknowledgement section should begin with Mr. Emil Fish, who is a visionary, and he's really the one to build the Fish Center. You know what? The acknowledgements come a little bit later. So let me tell you that this is a moment when I actually mark 5 years at YU. I came to YU in February of 2020, a couple of weeks before COVID. And also the moment when I finished 18 years of work on the memory of Babyn Yar. Although the book was written, many parts of it were written in the last couple of years, the project was conceived in the year 2006-2007 when I was a PhD student at the Jewish Theological Seminary. You'll see him in the slide in a moment, but next, Dr. David Fishman. I want to give him a round of applause. He's here today with me, my teacher, my Rebbe, and his wife, Elisa Ben-Porat, who is a colleague in the world of Soviet Jewish history. So I thought it would not make sense for me to tell you what the book is about and give this more like, structured, well-structured and boring lecture. Then you're not going to get the book. You're not going to want to buy it. So if this lecture, which is a mini lecture, is going to be confusing to you, that's fine. It's actually done by design and on purpose. It should entice you to come up with questions and to maybe buy the book. Because I'm not going to talk about the book today, just a little bit. You do need to know what Babyn Yar is. It was definitely a big part of my life. What you need to know is how long and how difficult the process was of writing the book. So let me begin with a couple more words of acknowledgement. We mentioned a teacher and Mr. Fish, the family. All is here, my wife, and my son Michael and my daughter Dina, who are joining us today. I also wanted to recognize the YU leadership, Rabbi Berman, Provost Selma Botman, Tim Stevens, who helped me with my work with building the Fish Center, the colleagues at Purdue University Press. I got to pause for a moment and ask you to give a big round of applause to Odaya Blau, who is my partner in crime for the Fish Center, and also for Dr. Karen Sean, who is on my team, together with Brittany Hegner-McNeely. Steve Fine and Professor Glenn Diner, who is here with us today, were instrumental in helping me get the project done. Glenn connected me actually as a friend, a neighbor in Stamford, a close friend, and the one who connected me with Purdue University Press. Thank you, Glenn. My family, my family in Israel, they're not here. I'll send them the recording whenever it's ready. Thank you, Uri. I wanted to recognize Tova Rosenberg and her husband Dov. Holocaust education has a long history at Yeshiva University, and they are the co-creators of Names Not Numbers, which is a very important project. And Tova was actually the one who introduced me to the search committee at YU. Thank you to the Sforim sale, to Ariela and Brendan. These are undergraduate students who are responsible for the book sale. The musicians, I will thank them later. I wanted to thank the students at the Fish Center, MA students, teachers in our certificate, and our donors. Thank you to Natan Sharansky. I actually contacted him. It was difficult to find him, but he immediately graciously said, of course, I will write the foreword to your book after he read it. And last but not least, I have to say thank you to the colleagues at YU and to Hashem. I actually think that this book was written against all odds. As soon as I finished the dissertation at Yeshiva University, at the Jewish Theological Seminary, I received a job in the non-profit world. I'll talk about it in a minute, but I got completely redirected from the world of academia, the world of writing, the world of doing research. And I actually fell in love with that world, stayed in it, and in a way, put in a drawer the dissertation and then learned about it again when I came to YU, when I got the position at YU, which really combines all the worlds, the world of nonprofit, the world of leadership, but also, fortunately for me, the world of academia. Okay, now let me start with a slideshow. So a little bit about Babyn Yar. The book is called Babyn Yar, the Ravine of Memory, Babyn Yar, between the Holocaust and the Great Patriotic War. Babyn Yar is not a typo. A lot of people have asked me, why do you call it Babyn Yar? I remember Babyn Yar, especially some Israeli friends. This is a very common question that I get. Babyn Yar is the pronunciation of Babyn Yar in Ukrainian. Babyn Yar in Ukrainian, Babyn Yar in Russian. And here you can see the script Babyn Yar in Yiddish. When I worked on the project, the world of Ukraine and Ukrainian was very much, I would say, far away from my world. I have proficiency in Russian and Yiddish. These are the two languages that I worked on. It was important for me to give the book the title Babyn Yar, and without getting into too much politics, in recognition of an ally of our country, and also in recognition of a country that unprovoked was invaded a couple of years ago in an extremely horrible and excruciating war. So the book is called Babyn Yar, Between the Holocaust and the Great Patriotic War, and we're moving on to the next slide. Between the Holocaust and the Great Patriotic War. that's already a concern for me personally as a grandson of Holocaust survivors. How can the Holocaust be between something and something? The Holocaust should stand above anything else. So actually, if you read the book, you realize that. But the Great Patriotic War is the name that in the Soviet Union was given to World War II on the Soviet front. In the Soviet Union, according to some estimates, there were 27 million civilians and soldiers who were killed. It's destruction on a magnitude that we in the West cannot realize. And truth to be told, in the Soviet Union, everything about the war, everything about the Holocaust, the murder of Jews, was always remembered in the context of the Great Patriotic War. The word Holocaust, by the way, did not exist in Russian. In the Soviet Union, the term Holocaust or Holocaust was not used until the Glasnost era, until the very end of the Soviet period. So it was important for me that American readers of the book would realize that terminology matters, and also this is the perspective between the Holocaust, between the 6 million Jews and the 27 million Soviet citizens. This is the perspective, the lens through which people in the Soviet Union viewed the war, and particularly Babyn Yar. So what's exactly Babyn Yar? Babyn Yar is the ravine on the northwestern outskirts of Kiev, in which close to 100,000 people were killed. The estimates vary, of which, again, estimates vary, 90% were Jewish. A large portion of them, 33,771, were killed within 36 hours in the most rapid massacre that took place in the entire Holocaust on September 29th, 30th, 1941. I, by the way, did not write much about Babyn Yar. I mentioned the murder only at the beginning of the book. What the book discusses, for the most part, is how the site was remembered. So the years when the book really picks up are 1953, particularly, I would say, even 1956, through 1976. And you'll see why in a moment. Oh, one sec. Babyn Yar was a symbol. I distilled it to a couple of arguments about the book that you should know, otherwise you may not want to buy it, right? So, number one, Babyn Yar is a symbol for the Holocaust in the Soviet Union. There were many Babyn Yars, actually, in the Soviet Union. But this was one of the largest sites, and the site has become a focal point for the memory of the Shoah, and particularly the memory of the Holocaust in the Soviet Union. It's a story of double murder, because in a way, the Nazis did the work murdering the Jews, and the Soviets did the work murdering the memory. And I mentioned before that Babyn Yar then becomes a focal point for dissent or dissidents, meaning for protesting what the Soviet government was doing. To very briefly describe translate from Ukrainian, there was no monument at Babyn Yar. The site was completely flooded, completely erased. And then, only 25 years later, in 1966, a small monument was placed there, and it said, "Here a monument will be erected to the Soviet people victims of fascism during the temporary occupation of the city of Kiev in 1941-1943. The people murdered there were called the Soviet victims of fascism." To make things even worse, in 1976, a huge monument was built in Babyn Yar, finally. But even that monument says, "Here during the years 1941-1943, over 100,000 citizens of Kiev and prisoners of war were killed by the German fascist invaders." No mentioning of the fact that they were Jewish. So you can imagine Jews knowing what happened to their ancestors and feeling the repression, being unable to express it publicly, only secretly. Gets even worse. In 1981, they added a plaque in Yiddish. And even in Yiddish, they did not say a word about the Jews being the primary target. So the focus of my work was art, primarily literature. Why did I focus on art and literature? Because these were the literary monuments. Instead of the stone monument that the Soviet government would not allow to build, people, individuals, started to spontaneously write about Babyn Yar, compose music about Babyn Yar, make paintings about Babyn Yar, and each of them became, in a way, an artistic monument. And the story of the book is that it really has two parts, and you must read them in conjunction to each other. One part, the Russian artists and writers, and they were actually pretty famous. I did not need to discover them. Yevgeny Yevtushenko appeared on the front page of Time magazine in 1961. He was really a Russian Bob Dylan. You know, he was an icon, a celebrity, a star. He came actually to America. He read his poetry at Madison Square Garden, toured the world, and he's the one who wrote the poem Babyn Yar. Viktor Nekrasov, Dmitri Shostakovich, the composer, and on the left, Anatoly Kuznetsov, the author of the novel Babyn Yar, were famous, very famous, maybe Nekrasov slightly less than the other ones. And I would say that when you read them together, other than understanding what Babyn Yar is about, Mr. Fish, hello! Thank you for coming. You got a round of applause before, and his wife Esther. Thank you. Did you find parking? Okay. Why is it so important to read them both? Because when you compare them, when you read them together, you realize that what a Russian non-Jewish writer could write about Babyn Yar, a Jewish one could not. That there could not be a Jewish Bob Dylan in Russia, in Soviet Russia. There could not be a Jewish icon, the stature of Yevgeny Yevtushenko or Dmitri Shostakovich, who, by the way, protested the silence over Babyn Yar, even though they were not Jewish. So it really shows you something about Soviet Jewish culture in the Soviet Union. And those who wrote about Babyn Yar, I have to say, for people who are not in the world of Yiddish literature, you would probably not know any of these names. Some of them were completely obscure. The poetry they wrote about Babyn Yar was obscure. We'll actually hear one of the poems in a moment. But the poetry was like not mentioning the word Babyn Yar. You know, it was very much cloudy and obfuscated. Dore Chaykine from the left, Shike Driz, Shloime Cherniavsky, Peretz Markish, and Itzik Kipnis. Some of their books never appeared in the original. They were published in translation, teeny tiny books with a circulation of 2,000 copies. And I had to really go look for them and find them. Okay, one very important thing that I wanted to highlight is what does it mean to be a scholar and a leader of an organization? People who are leaders of organizations who are not scholars are doing an amazing job. Very important. Scholars who are spending all day long teaching in the archive or the library, they also do a very important job. My position was to be in both worlds, as the Native Americans say, having one foot on each canoe. Sometimes you may lose balance. I think, in a way, because I wrote the book first as a student, a graduate student, and then as a leader of an organization, I wanted to show you how, in a way, it shaped my thinking about Babyn Yar. So first of all, I had to think about Babyn Yar as a leader. And it was very important for me, after many years in the world of Holocaust education, that the book is not going to be about 33,771 Jewish victims of the Babyn Yar massacre, but, as Michael Berenbaum says, 1 Jew 6 million times. That there will be a face attached. There will be a face attached to every single name. That there will be a connection. And these are Malvina and Polina Babat, 3-year-old and 5-year-old who were murdered at Babyn Yar. I found their image in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum archives. It was important for me that the book would not just be about data, but rather grab the reader and remind him we're talking about people. But also, I wanted to lead as a scholar. And I wanted to make sure that in my scholarship, the students also understand that things are sometimes complex. That yes, this is Yeshiva University, the flag of Israel is flying here 365 days a year, that we're proud of our heritage, of who we are. At the same time, scholarship is about subtleties. scholarship is all too often about nuances. For instance, in our class, the Holocaust in the Soviet Union, go back. In our class, the Holocaust in the Soviet Union, we talked about permitted dissent. Those who protested what the Soviet government was doing were dissidents, but they also got permission from the government to be dissidents. What does it mean that you are going against your government that permitted it? So take a look at Yevgeny Yevtushenko. He's reading the poem Babyn Yar in front of thousands of people in Moscow. The government could have clearly arrested him and made sure to prevent him from doing it. But Yevtushenko was, in a way, a cultural diplomat. And he was sent by the Soviet government on these literature, poetry reading tours. He left a very complicated legacy, and it was very important for me that the students understand it and appreciate it. The story sometimes is more complex. Things are many, many shades of gray, not exactly black and white. Okay, now I would like to talk quickly about the evolution of the book. Couple of poems, music and sushi. Okay? So the book, I thought it would be interesting. This is the only time I'm going to give this talk. Next time, it will be about the book itself. What does it mean for a man to come to America and to write, to engage in a research project from the moment you sit in the classroom to the moment you celebrate the book with your guests and your friends? So it really all began, this is like the Seinfeld episode, that goes backwards, and it ends with Jerry saying, wow, the World Wide Web, the internet. I don't know if you remember that episode. But in 1991, my brother comes home with a cassette that his friend Doron in high school gave him, and the cassette had Shostakovich's 13th Symphony. My brother and I, titled Babyn Yar. My brother and I were students in the Tel Aviv Conservatory of Music. My brother is a pianist. I am an amateur clarinetist. And the beginning, the origin of the work is tremendous love for music. Love for music and passion for music. And I remember the symphony, and then, now we have to go to fast forward, to 2007. I went to the Metropolitan Opera shop while I was a student at JTS. I was taking with Dr. David Fishman the class on the Holocaust in the Soviet Union, or actually Jews and Judaism in the Soviet Union. This was a whole history of Jews in the Soviet Union. And I came upon the CD and I said to myself, I'll write my final paper about Babyn Yar, about the symphony Babyn Yar and the poem Babyn Yar and how it was created. And this is the final paper, by the way. I found it the other day that I submitted to Dr. David Fishman, who is here with us today. Jews and Judaism in the Soviet Union. Okay. This was actually in 2007. I wrote the final paper. This is the Jewish Theological Seminary. This is the institution that really shaped my attitude to Judaism as a civilization, but also to scholarship as heavily based on the knowledge of languages, something that at JTS was highly emphasized. Knowledge of Russian, knowledge of Yiddish, knowledge of Hebrew, and appreciation of our civilization. Okay? Okay, then go back, I think. Keep going. Then in 2008, I met Yevgeny Yevtushenko. He came to the University of Maryland to read again the poem Babyn Yar. I actually did not speak to him, and I wasn't sure if he knew me and everything I want to say about him in the book, because again, I saw him as a complicated figure, and he would have approved it. He passed away a couple of years ago. What was very much on my mind at the beginning of the project is the poem Babyn Yar by Yevtushenko. I'm going to call Aida Plotzker. You're reading which one? Okay. So.
Hi, everyone. From Babyn Yar by Yevgeny Yevtushenko. No monument stands over Babyn Yar. A drop, sheer as a crude gravestone. I am afraid. Today, I am as old in years as all the Jewish people. Now I seem to be a Jew. Here I plod through ancient Egypt. Here I perish crucified on the cross. And to this day, I bear the scars of nails. The wild grasses rustle over Babyn Yar. The trees look ominous, like judges. Here all things scream silently, and baring my head, slowly I feel myself turning gray. And I myself am one massive, soundless scream above the thousands buried here. I am each old man here shot dead. I am each child here shot dead. Nothing in me shall ever forget. May Internationale thunder and ring when for all time is buried and forgotten the last of the anti-Semites on this earth. There is no Jewish blood that's blood of mine, but hated with a passion that's corrosive am I by anti-Semites like a Jew. And that is why I call myself a Russian.
Thank you. Thank you to our graduate, one of our first graduates, Ida Plotzker. Okay, and then as the years wore on, this is the poem Babyn Yar by Yevtushenko. Then in 2011 comes The Family. Things slow down. This is Mishi and Dina when they were little. My wife was a professor in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, a professor of sociology, and I joined her, and we stayed in much colder Wisconsin for 13 years, actually. Yeah. Okay, and then in 2012, much later, I started to work on the Yiddish works, and I first of all had to find them. And I realized, wow, what beautiful poetry. But Shlomo Cherniavsky, nobody knew who he is, completely anonymous guy. And I would say because he was a Yiddish writer, he was not a Russian writer. And when you see a poem that mentions Babyn Yar briefly, no title, printed only in translation, and I mentioned again a publication of a couple of thousand copies, I realized that there could not be a Jewish Yevtushenko there. Then my focus started to shift to the Jewish world. And I would like now to ask Sari Scheinfeld, another graduate of ours, to read the beautiful poem Untitled by Shlomo Cherniavsky.
A horrible disaster swept through. In what desperate hope am I coming here like before? Why am I coming here? That bygone year of 44, the soul has turned blind from sorrow. Once again, the wind will carry clouds of ash over Babyn Yar. A little child's shoe lies on the grass. It's half rotten, but where's the child? The mother's hands, she's half awake. They wander over the child's head. They touch upon his gentle cheeks. They slide, not hands, but shadows. A child's shoe rots here in the grass. But whose, and who will put it on? Over Babyn Yar, the winds whistle. What was in vain, and what was not? The leaves are flying over Babyn Yar. A leaf descends on a shoe.
Thank you. And the focus of the book was moving as history was unfolding in front of my eyes. In 2012, right before I finished the book, by the way, I moved from the field of history to literature and ended up in cultural history. So I'd like to recognize Dr. David Roskis. David Roskis is here. David Fishman is both here and there, by the way. And David Roskis wrote to me that due to a funeral, he could not be here. So I would like to recognize both mentors for helping me to connect these two worlds of history and literature together right before I finished the dissertation. Then in 2014, I became a leader of a local, regional Holocaust education organization in Milwaukee, the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center. And that's really the world in which my deep understanding and appreciation of what it means to be a Jew in the world, what it means to be a Jew in America, what Holocaust education is about, formed. I put aside the dissertation at that time. It was finished, no thoughts about the book. In 2020, I'm cheating, this is a picture from a couple of years later, but in 2020 I became the head of the Fish Center. Mr. Fish, you missed the accolades to you that I gave before. But this is the man who had the vision that Yeshiva University will play an instrumental role in building and I would say growing a Holocaust education entity on a world class. And here are my students, by the way, in the Fish Center on a trip to Central Europe, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Austria, and Poland. This is the moment when I started to work on the book, to polish it, to talk to colleagues, to get the help of so many people who held my hand throughout the journey. And then war in Ukraine broke out. In 2022, it was the war in Ukraine that was on my mind. Babyn Yar was on the news all of a sudden. I remember going to Ynet, the Israeli website, and reading about a Russian missile attack on Babyn Yar. I won't read it to you, but when you read the end of the book, you would see that the end of the book reflects on the war. Now I was not thinking about Yevtushenko, Chernyavsky anymore when I was writing the conclusion for the book, but rather about the message of Babyn Yar. And the message is, in an ideal world, in reality it's not always possible. I'm Israeli, I understand it, but in an ideal world, we should all strive to build a better world based on understanding between people, mutual respect, recognition of other individuals and other cultures. So it really ended the book with a hope for peace and reconciliation. 2023, I had an interesting conversation with Amik Diamant. Very quickly, Amik Diamant was one of the Jews who organized the protest at Babyn Yar in 1966, the first public commemoration. And he told me that when Yevgeny Yevtushenko spoke about the Ravine Babyn Yar that he came to see, there was no ravine back then. He said, this is a lie. He talks about a sheer drop. There is no drop. The site was all covered. So in order to demonstrate it in my class, which I just finished teaching, I used ChatGPT. And this is me asking ChatGPT to come up with a picture of Yevgeny Yevtushenko by Babyn Yar. As you can see here, the ravine, Yevtushenko, the actual Babyn Yar by then was destroyed. So this was already another moment when the book becomes the substance of a course. This is what Babyn Yar actually looks like today. The Babyn Yar is completely flat, as the Soviet regime filled it with pulp and razed the ravine to the ground. And then came October 7th, and this is actually where I want to end. My father called me a few days later, and I'm not saying that I am particularly fond of gematria and any kind of any kind of word or letter games, but my father said, did you notice that people are talking about the fact that the letters in the name Be'eri, Kibbutz Be'eri, are the same letters of Babyn Yar. This was the worst massacre that happened to Jews since the Holocaust. Some of the most gruesome videos that I did end up watching from the scene of Nova did have piles of bodies. You can imagine that while I was writing on the book, doing the research, I looked at events like that, mass shootings, mass murder, as history. I did not think about it as something that could be a part of my present in my lifetime or the future of my children. And all of a sudden, while I was going over the book for the last time, doing the very last edits, I found a very powerful passage that speaks exactly about the moment where we are right now. And it's the very way, it's the way the story Babyn Yar by Itzik Kipnis ends. And I would like now to invite another graduate student. The only problem is not an alum, he's still in the program. Eli Klapper to come and to read us the ending of Babyn Yar. For us right now, having the Chatufim who are still in Gaza on our mind, as we hope for their swift release, I'd like you to think about the ending of Babyn Yar by Itzik Kipnis.
I normally don't read or speak in public, but for Shai, I told him it's special. Dear brother, let us rise from the earth. Let us shake the ashes from us and flare up with all the light stored in each of us, as the body of a man whose foot, hand, or even one finger has been amputated becomes incomplete, smaller than what it used to be, but a people. When it befalls a disaster like the one we endured, a people, when you divide it by half or into 3/3, is like a drip of water, like round drop of quicksilver. You plucked half of it out, but the second half runs off, is filled in, and turns back to being full. Let us rise up from the earth, and let us stand up strong.
And I conclude the program with hope. We look at Babyn Yar, we remember, but we look towards a better future with a hope that the coming days will be better. That's the book is dedicated to my mother. It's in memory of my mother, Rachel Pilnik, maiden name Chazanovsky, who passed away in 2019, right before I came to Yeshiva University. And in a way, the book, even though my family comes from Vilna and not from Kiev, has autobiographical roots between the Holocaust and the Great Patriotic War. My grandfather, Misha, fought in the Great Patriotic War. He was actually a captain in the Soviet Navy. And my grandmother, Fruma, was a Holocaust survivor. She survived multiple camps in Lithuania from 1941 until her liberation in 1945. My mom is the older sister. This is my mom and my aunt Etty. Etty is in Haifa and couldn't be with us, unfortunately, today. This is the picture they took in Vilna in 1957, right before they made Aliyah to Israel. One more. And this is my mom with my son Mishi back in Wisconsin. Okay. And my mom, as the daughter of a Holocaust survivor and a Soviet officer, embodies the story of Babyn Yar as lying between the Holocaust and the Great Patriotic War. Okay, so I thought that it would be a powerful moment to offer you now the symphony Babyn Yar by Dmitri Shostakovich, with a choir, huge choir, and a full orchestra. But that's not possible at the Sky Cafe, unfortunately. Fortunately, Dmitri Shostakovich was a Judophile. He was a man who really had deep admiration for Jews and love for Jews. He had Jewish musicians, friends, Jewish culture. He also wrote a second trio for piano, violin, and cello that was dedicated to the victims of Majdanek, his second trio. And I would like now to invite Elliot Roman, Clara Cho, and Lauren Goldsamt to join us. A quick editorial comment. Elliot is the son of Lois Roman, our first graduate, and Lauren is the granddaughter of Dr. Karen Sean, our Director of Educational Outreach. I would like to welcome them. Music. Yeah. Music, Q&A, and food. Wow. And I wanted to thank you for attending my book launch, and to all of those who helped me to get here.